Welcome back to another video. These are condensed lecture videos of what we discuss in class in case you miss something, you want to review something, or you just want to explore a concept a little bit deeper. So that's really the intent and the heart of these videos. So we're still talking about the age of absolutism. We've been on it for about 2 or 3 classes now, but it is a huge topic because there's a lot of different nations involved, and so we've been dealing with a different nation each time. We've already discussed Spain, and we've already discussed France a bit, and France is going to come back in this one, but specifically today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're still going to discuss a nation, this time Prussia, but we first have to get the context of how Prussia came to be a nation and how they were actually unified, and a lot of it is going to have to do with the 30 Years' War and the different happenings around Europe at this time in the age of absolutism. So we can skip over the do now, but you can look at it here in case you missed it. A bunch of different questions that you can do on your own time. And the connection is everything to do about religion in Europe at this time and really how people are ruling under the age of absolutism. Because remember, in case you forgot, absolutism, plainly and simply put, a very generic way of putting it, is unlimited power of one person. One person is in charge, which is why most of the time we're dealing with central monarchies. We're dealing with people who have all the power over land, over a specific nation, over numerous nations, and what they say goes. There's really no laws and legislation that is balancing out their power and also checking their power. So a bit different from what we have today in America right now. So then we go on and we look at this video. This is really just a clip of Thor and Loki, 2 characters in the Marvel universe in, I think, the Dark World movie. It's a scene of Thor actually helping Loki, who is his enemy and his brother, but they really don't get along and they have a lot of hostility towards one another. But Thor actually helps Loki because there's a bigger enemy out there. So it's kind of this concept of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that's kind of going to be the overarching theme of what we're going to talk about today to an extent. But first, let's discuss the Holy Roman Empire. In previous videos and previous lectures, we discussed it a little bit, but we really didn't state what it is. And I often find that students are getting confused over the Holy Roman Empire because of the word empire, really. Because at this time, the Holy Roman Empire, I wouldn't even describe as being a true empire where everybody's unified. I would describe it as just a glued together mess of hundreds of small, separate states. So even though they have the same team name, so to speak, they're really all playing different games. They're really not too unified. They're completely spread out. In addition to that, they're not really Roman. They don't really speak Latin like in the classical tradition. Instead, they're so spread out, as you can see in the map here in all these different places, they're so spread out that all of them speak different languages for the most part. So you don't really have a unification. Really, when you're saying Holy Roman Empire, the only unification was the Holy Roman Emperor and Catholicism. But as we're going to see today, the holy part, the Catholic part, isn't even going to be standing up really to scrutiny. So it's really not Catholic anymore. It's really not Roman, and it's really not much of an empire. It's as if you're trying to glue together a bunch of separate puzzle pieces to create your own version of a puzzle, and it doesn't really work. And in the Holy Roman Empire, the ruler was an emperor, was one emperor, but he didn't really have much power over rival princes. And when we're talking about rival princes, we're really talking about the different kings of these areas, the different kings of France and the Dutch Republic and later on Prussia. That's really what we're talking about. And it's this power divide. It's this gluing the separate puzzle pieces of different puzzles together that ends up contributing to the 30 Years' War, in addition to religious division, of course, but really it's also the politics of all this power going on, and we've discussed power at length so far in the last 2 or 3 classes. So here's a bigger picture of what I was showing you. You see all these different lands here, and this boundary is the boundary of the Holy Roman Empire. So within here, you have a lot of different places, and we're going to see how this map ends up actually changing by 1648. So pretty interesting to note, though. But that's the map of the Holy Roman Empire and all the other places surrounding it. So this 30 Years' War that I referenced takes place, obviously, for 30 years. Historians are not very clever in the way that they make up names. Everything is exactly as it appears. Is from 1618 to 1648. So if you can remember when the war started, 1618, you could remember when the war ends, 1648, which also means you should remember when the peace treaty will be signed, which we'll talk about later, because again, you're just adding 30 years. And there's 4 phases of this 30 Years' War. Number 1 is the Bohemian Phase, number 2 is the Danish Phase, number 3 is the Swedish Phase, and number 4 is the French Phase. So one way to remember that is to kind of take the first letters of each of these words, since they're all different, and form a mnemonic device. The one that I use to remember is Big Dave sounds French. Big Dave sounds French. And it helps me too because that last word is actually corresponding with the actual term, French, right? Big Dave sounds French. The 4th phase is French. So it really does help me. If you come up with your own, great. Again, it's BDSF, Bohemian, Danish, Swedish, and French. And the first 2 phases are really more about religion than anything else. And it's really more localized. It's not really a widespread war at that point. But then when the Swedes and the French get involved in the last 2 phases, it becomes much more widespread, much greater, much bloodier, much more violent, and it's less about religion and more about politics. So let's start off with round 1, the Bohemian Phase. At this time, a lot of Protestants are living in Bohemia, but they have a Catholic ruler. And in history, whenever you know that a bunch of the people are one religion and the ruler is a separate religion, you know there's going to be problems on both sides. So it's at this time that the Habsburgs rulers in Spain and in other areas, but we've discussed them before, granted Protestant toleration in the letters of majesty. But when Ferdinand II, who becomes the Holy Roman Emperor, comes to power, he's actually going to revoke that. And this is going to lead to trouble because obviously the Protestants are not going to like this. And Ferdinand II is going to expect them to either convert or leave, or they're going to continue to be persecuted. So there's a lot of tension going on, and we've discussed a lot of this tension before because it's not just happening here. It's happening across Europe for the most part between Protestants and Catholics. That was a huge issue of this time period because of the Protestant Reformation. This is still an extension of that. And this is going to lead specifically to what's called the Defenestration of Prague. And this is actually an odd and curious story and pretty funny, if you ask me. The Holy Roman Emperor, Ferdinand II, is going to send a group of men to talk with the Protestants in Bohemia. But the Protestants are fed up with Ferdinand II and his Catholic ways, so they actually throw the people that he sent out of a window, roughly 70 feet down. That's really what defenestration is meaning here. Throwing a person out of a window. Crazy to think of that that's how they were handling their problems, but that is literally the defenestration of Prague. So they throw these guys out of a window to send a message to Ferdinand II, but the guys live. Now there's differing interpretations of this. Ferdinand II and the Catholics are going to interpret this as those guys lived because the angels gracefully came down upon them and guided them into the ground. Whereas the Protestants are going to say, no, we threw them out of a window and there just happened to be a lot of poop on the ground, a lot of manure from different animals, and that kind of softened the blow. But either way, it's going to make Ferdinand II furious. And when you have a Catholic emperor furious at Protestant people in his empire, it's going to lead to battles. And so it's going to lead to the Battle of White Mountain, and the Catholics win a decisive victory. But it does make somebody else involved. And here is a picture of the defenestration of Prague, a couple different artistic renderings, throwing it out of a window. But again, it's going to lead to the second phase, the Danish phase. You see, the Danish at this time have a Protestant ruler who wants to help, so they invade the Holy Roman Empire. You see that the Danish in Denmark are coming up here from this area more towards the north, and they're going to try to come down and invade the Holy Roman Empire to help their Bohemian Protestant brethren. But it's not going to work out very well. They're going to lose to a mercenary hired out by the Holy Roman Empire known as Wallenstein. And Wallenstein's actually going to defeat them, but then even chase them back into the Denmark area, into the Danish area over here. And he's going to be causing them problems for a little bit. So the Danish don't really help. And at this point, you see that the Catholics are winning basically 2-0. If this was like a baseball game, the Catholics would have 2 runs, and the Protestants at this time in this area would have 0. They'd be getting shut out so far. But it does lead to our third phase. And remember, the first 2 phases are more localized, the Bohemian Phase and the Danish Phase, and more about religion. But the last 2 phases are going to be more about politics, and it's going to be more widespread. It's going to be this entire area and then some, not just these couple areas here. So this third phase is the Swedish phase. Remember, Big Dave sounds French, Swedish phrase. And this is the one guy that you have to remember for tests, for quizzes, and for your general knowledge of this time period. This is really the only Protestant guy that you're going to have to remember for this. And that's, if I'm saying it correctly, because I'm going to be terrible at pronouncing it, it's Gustavus Adolphus, and he's the king of Sweden, and he's Lutheran. Remember, Lutheran is a type of Protestant, okay? So this guy Adolphus is Protestant, and he's credited as a military mastermind. So he's really going to get involved in helping the Protestants fight against the Holy Roman Empire, and he's going to cause the empire some problems. So he gets involved with the conflict. He's actually credited also as being, quote, the father of modern warfare, because he's one of the first people to use mobile artillery, actually moving cannons all around the place, not just having them set up in one area. And he's receiving support from the French. Pause and think about that for the moment. If you recall when we discussed the French in another lecture and another video, the French are predominantly Catholic. So why would the French Catholics be going against the Holy Roman Empire and Emperor who is Catholic? Well, it has everything to do with politique and Cardinal Richelieu. Again, politique is putting politics over religion, caring more about the state and the nation than what religion you are. And France does not like that the Holy Roman Empire, specifically the Habsburgs, have too much land and too much power. So they kind of want to balance that power out. So they're going to be financing the Swedish Protestants. You could kind of remember it this way: Swedish swords and France funds. And here is a bunch of different pictures of the battles that are actually taking place, specifically the Battle of Brightonfield. Okay, so you're going to have Adolphus here with all his troops and his allies, and you're going to have Tilly, who was on the Holy Roman Empire side, here with his troops. And you see just the movement taking place, and Adolphus and the Swedes take the battle. What about the last phase, the French phase? This is the largest and bloodiest of all phases. France did not want Protestantism to spread, but they didn't want the Habsburgs to spread either. We talked about that. This is essentially the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah, I hate the Protestants, they're saying, but I hate the Habsburgs more, so I want to push them out. Ultimately, when all is said and done, after all 4 phases, the war is inconclusive. Nobody really wins, but it leads to a peace treaty being signed. And you could remember the French phase as France fights and the Swedes supply, because at this point, France is actually fighting with soldiers, but the Swedes are going to be financing France, so a little turn of events there. So this peace treaty that's signed is the Peace of Westphalia, all right? These are all the different benefits of this peace treaty. The Netherlands become independent. Alsace goes to France. Switzerland becomes independent confederation. They still are today. Calvinism is accepted in the Holy Roman Empire, and Brandenburg gains territory. This is important because Brandenburg ends up becoming Brandenburg, Prussia, and later just Prussia, and that's really what we're leading up to. So the results, Holy Roman Empire is weakened, and the balance of power shifts a little bit more towards France rather than Spain and the Habsburgs, and this ends religious war.